habit of doing. It's not what I would prefer to do. In this case, it involves the use of rhetoric in our local political discussions, and like how the misuse of it can be harmful and even dangerous. So I've sat on this for about a month. I've been really unsure of how to respond or whether I should even respond at all. And I've just run the gamut of emotions on this. But having said that, I've decided that I'm going to do something of a case study and how our local politicians could do better. The source of my material involves Sean Swope, who's Lewis County Commissioner, and his comments that were made on the KELA program, Let's Talk About It, with Chad Taylor, who's the owner and publisher of our local newspaper. The recording took place on March 22nd, and while it had been online, it doesn't appear to be online anymore. I just want to express that the opinions in this episode are my own, and that I'm responsible for any factual errors made in this episode. And back to these two individuals. They have a huge responsibility and an obligation in our community, given their respective platforms and authority. And this is not something to be taken lightly, nor to be used as a bully pulpit for their own ends. So I'm not going to cover the entire interview. The part of the radio show that I will be addressing in this episode starts at 20 minutes, 37 seconds, and it goes until the episode ends at 29 minutes and 50 seconds. So even though that is only 9 minutes and 13 seconds, there's a lot to cover. And I'm going to try my hardest to keep this short and concise, and I apologize if I don't. So I'm using this interview as an example of how the discourse from our local politicians and community leaders, in this case, Sean Swope and Chad Taylor, can be improved to responsibly discuss important issues in our local area. There are many ways that discourse can go sideways or become misleading, but I'm going to sort of shunt everything into basically three broad categories. And the first category is technical or technicality, where something is technically true, but it functionally serves another purpose. So the second category is anecdata, which is a portmanteau of anecdotal and data. And it's defined as anecdotal evidence based on personal observations or opinions, random investigations, etc., but that are presented as a fact. And the third category is misrepresentation or just outright falsehood. So we'll get started here. Chad opens the conversation with the passing of mentioning the passing of a couple issues in our local cities, Centralia and Chehalis. Chehalis had passed an ordinance against public camping. Centralia had annexed some land that had an encampment on it. And Chad points out that this all started with Swope's legislation from earlier October of last year. So let's get started.
So city of Chehalis, kind of headed by Councilman Carnes, pushed forward their no encampment ordinance. And I want people to understand, we're not outlawing homelessness. We understand that we will always have this with us. And we didn't make any laws to make it unlawful to camp on public property. It already is. Yeah. We just gave an avenue. and
It's already illegal.
Yeah, it's already illegal. We just gave an ordinance that says, when we do remove an encampment, this is the process in which this is going to take place.
Okay, so that was Sean Swope and Chad Taylor. And they're discussing Ordinance 1338, which was Sean's original ordinance that was passed on October 25th of 2022. And he claims that they didn't make it unlawful for any person to camp on any county property. But if you go look up the ordinance, and I will provide all of these documents in my show notes, you can go look them up. They're also available on the Lewis County website. But in the Ordinance 1338, 8.60.020, camping prohibited. And it literally says this: it shall be unlawful for any person to camp on any county property, except in areas specifically designated and posted for these purposes. So you can see where the average citizen might misunderstand the statement, it shall be unlawful for any person to camp on county property, as seemingly indicating, in fact, make it unlawful to camp on public property. And sure, it doesn't say homeless anywhere in there, but I'm pretty sure that they're not concerned with housed individuals doing so. So one might be led to ask a couple questions. If this was already on the books, why does it exist again here in Ordinance 1338? And perhaps Swope is referring to the fact that the violation for camping is not a misdemeanor, but rather a civil infraction. And the civil infraction just doesn't go on your record, and you're not arrested for it. You just simply pay a fine, or you go to court to challenge the citation. But I think the issue here is that the demographic most likely to be cited for this particular infraction will be our local homeless population, a population that by definition do not likely have an address, money, or transportation, and likely struggle with substance use disorder or mental health issues. So I think a good question would be, what happens if a person is unable to pay their fine or make their court appearances? And so according to the Lewis County Code 1.20.040, Section 10, notice of failure to sign, appear, or satisfy the penalty. If a person fails to sign a notice of civil infraction, is guilty of a misdemeanor. Any person willfully violating his or her written and signed promise to respond is guilty of a misdemeanor. A person who willfully fails to pay a monetary penalty as required by the court under this chapter may be found in civil contempt. So, it seems to me like it does escalate into being legal trouble one way or the other. Now, sure, nowhere in that does it mention anything about being homeless, but they would be the greatest demographic at risk for this type of citation. And they would also be the most resource limited. So I put this rhetoric under a sort of technicality category because while maybe technically true, it has a side effect or it functionally does something else, which in this case is probably going to unduly affect the homeless population. So they go on in the interview and they drive. Sean talks about driving around in Centralia. He says most of the corners they've had new people because we have ample amount of services. He talks about going to Blank League Junction with Centralia Police Chief Stacy Denham and Centralia Mayor Kelly Smith Johnston, and that he's just shocked. There's just so many more structures, so much more garbage. He's really shocked at the amount of needles everywhere. And he gives kind of a nod to Chief Denham for his ability to engage in conversation and just ask questions. And I'm not going to really address all that stuff in there, but we'll move on to the next part that they discuss in this interview.
We have a recovery navigator program that our law enforcement is trying to utilize, but it's not working.
What is really quickly, what is a recovery
navigator is a system to where caseworkers are going out to connect people to services.
Okay.
And currently right now, I think Cascade does the management piece and then Gather Church does the recovery navigator piece of it.
Provides a service? Okay.
Well, it's not. They connect them to services.
Okay, got it.
Well, we asked this one gentleman if he has engaged in those services or if has
he heard about them?
Has he talked to Gather Church?
Okay.
To get help, and he says, "Well, I do want help, and I have talked to them." And when I approach someone, they send me to another person, and then that person sends me to another person, and that person sends me to another person. And he goes, after you do that over and over, you just begin to realize that maybe, and this is his words, you realize that they like to bring us stuff, but they don't want us to get well. They want to keep us here. And I was just in awe because this has happened over and over.
And the mayor was there with you. She witnessed and heard the same exact conversation.
Yeah.
So okay, the navigator. So it sounds like there's definitely some process problems, right?
Right.
Or no, maybe there's not a check and balance, or maybe there's no oversight.
Accountability.
Accountability. Yeah. That's a big thing with me. I know it is with you too. There's a lot of money that's spent on homelessness. Is an industry where there's a lot of money in that, which also comes, misuse of funds.
All right. So let's get into this Recovery Navigator program. Swope does mention that it's a program to provide services, but it's actually more complicated than that. And so I went and looked it up, and if you want to look it up, you can. The intent of the Recovery Navigator program is to provide behavioral health services to individuals who intersect with police because of simple drug possession, or people who have frequent criminal legal system contact, and others who are referred from county sources. And these programs are to serve people who are at risk of arrest or already have been involved in the criminal legal system due to unmet behavioral health needs. And it's a new program. And when I stress new, like it's pretty new. The entire program is slightly over a year old, and locally in other jurisdictions, they're probably likely only like 6 or 7 months into it after ramping up services. The one thing I want to point out about this Recovery Navigator program is that it is a project of the Healthcare Authority. And what they do is work with BHASOs, which is behavioral health, something. You can go look it up. I don't know off the top of my head. They're regional, so usually they work across multiple counties. And then they contract with service provider to provide these services. And that's an important thing to remember. I want you to hold on to that. This is owned by the Healthcare Authority. It's a contract with a BHASO, and that contract is then with service providers. It's important for our discussion as we go forward. Anyways, so I put this segment of the interview under anecdata, which I'll give that definition again. So anecdata defined as anecdotal evidence based on personal observations or opinions, random investigations, etc., but they are presented as fact. And of the 3 categories that I mentioned that contribute to the discourse that is unhelpful or misleading or polarizing, the anecdata category appears to be one of Swope's most favorite. It's the tool he reaches for the most when he's doing public statements like this. And so when he isn't name dropping, which he does that quite a bit too, he'll talk about he's with the Centralia Police Chief, Stacey Denham, or he's with the Centralia Mayor, Kelly Smith Johnston. He typically references nondescript persons. So he'll say things like, somebody told me, or I've been hearing from a lot of people, or I've had several people call, or I've received a lot of emails about. And this is pretty common. In a previous KELA appearance, where he's discussing drugs coming up and down I-5, he had this to say, quote, "And I heard it was in a conversation to where a person literally said, Mexico is thanking America for everyone that gives out needles because they help their business and for people to be addicted and strung out on drugs," unquote. So the problem with anecdata is that it's unverifiable, even with witnesses, by nature of it being a person's opinion. Unless someone actually recorded or documented this individual reaching out to gather and being bounced around between caseworkers, there's little actual info to go on. And furthermore, even if that video did exist, the whole situation lacks any context or testimony from those involved that could corroborate or shed light on this actual event. Anecdotal, by definition, isn't a systematic investigation. It isn't even evidence. And I mean, I would think of all people, Police Chief Stacey Denham should know this and understand the concept of anecdotal data. Now, do I believe that this particular individual said those words? Yeah, most likely they probably did. However, that individual's response, the actual truth of it, could land anywhere on a spectrum from full-blown lying to absolute truth. If I had to guess, I'm going to say it's probably going to land somewhere murkier than what Sean Swope would prefer it to be. So homeless people aren't idiots. So picture this. You're homeless. You're living on an encampment that has been a part of a heated discussion across the entire community. And one day, a county commissioner, the police chief, and the city mayor stop by to want to talk to you about Gather. Now, many homeless persons, while struggling with various issues, they usually have finely tuned street smarts. So what if this person just read the room and decided that their best option was to pick a side? Yeah, Gather, that's it. They don't want to help us or whatever. So another overlooked issue in this scenario is the fact that providing services and case management to many people is a thankless job, literally thankless. As a matter of fact, thankless might be one of the best outcomes you can get. Often, certain individuals can be downright rude, mean, entitled, and so on. So Gather received a call, for example, for services from a woman in East Los County, and they sent 2 people out. And when they got there, she told them to fuck off. And so they left. This was then repeated 2 more times. And this was initiated by the person that was telling them to get out of there. So another person that I know personally used to attend gather church services and meal services, but she absolutely despised being there. And yet services were provided anyways because she needed it and it's the right thing to do. And the same woman had some pretty severe mental health issues. And one day she ended up completely naked sitting on the bathroom floor of Gather's Cafe. And so staff called 911 and for medical care, but the police were sent instead. And the only thing that they were willing to do was trespass her from the property. So staff declined and just ultimately took her to the hospital themselves. So let me just drive my point home with an example. So I reached out to a friend and I tasked them to do one thing for me. I said, hey, can you just ask a group of Lewis County residents one question? I want you to record their answers and the town and area of which they reside. And so the question was this: in a sentence or two, how do you feel Sean Swope has done as your Lewis County commissioner? So one resident from Centralia responded, good old boys club, but young. Another Centralia resident said his approach to homelessness and his arrogant responses make me question his suitability for the role. A resident from Chehalis had this to say: he's a piece of shit. Another Centralia resident said, I am disappointed in the way Sean Swope has represented the county for a while. He has very problematic views that encourage those behaviors. A resident from Morton said, Swope has been an impediment to the progress in Lewis County. He is clearly biased and unconcerned with what is best for the health and growth of our area, making decisions based off his own narrow-minded, irrational prejudices rather than fact, logic, or consideration for all Lewis County residents. A Centralia, looks like District 2 resident, responded, he doesn't understand or care about the people in his community. He uses his position for empty political grandstanding to serve his own ego. And then there's a resident from Winlock that said, he has done a shitty job. He should not have been elected as a commissioner. He is doing a disservice to the people. Now, ask yourself if Sean Swope would be so eager to accept the truth of these claims. Can we say these statements are true in and of themselves? Now, anecdotal data is not bad per se. We often deal regularly in anecdotes. I mean, I just responded to Swope's anecdotes, I'm having a hard time saying the word, anecdotes with more anecdotes. But without the requisite research, investigation, verification, it's more like a rhetorical function than a truth determiner. The issue at hand isn't that anecdote or anecdata exists or is talked about. What's critical here is, I'm going to use Spider-Man's uncle, Ben Parker, his old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. How responsible is it for Chad Taylor, owner and publisher of our local newspaper, and Sean Swope, elected county commissioner, to make such a serious charge broadcast on public radio? So I'm not going to focus on Chad Taylor's comments so much, both for time reasons and because he surprisingly seems to be even less informed than Sean Swope on most of these things. On this topic, he's probably best known for his poverty pimps comment. He refers to all this money that's just flooding into the area and buying buildings and so on. And I'm not really going to concern myself with that. He likes to beat this drum on this whole no oversight, no accountability stuff, which I'll get into here soon. So they then move into the next segment, and they actually kind of shift gears here. So here we go.
Let me explain something. So I think in October, we had a person at the Centralia City Council meeting from Gathered Church say that we had 1,800 people in our coordinated entry list.
Okay.
And I thought, man, that is a high number. 1,800 people.
That's a lot.
1,800 people in our coordinated entry that need services, that need that are homelessness or facing homelessness, that need services. And I thought, man. So then Gather Church was in charge of it. We moved that contract over because they said that they wanted out at the time, and still have not engaged in services with them. That went over, and then we started to go through their list. And what we saw was that there were people on that list over 5 times, the same person.
Yep.
Redundancy over and over. And we were able to dwindle that down to about 120 people. And
wow.
I think what people need to understand is the way that the homeless services and the contracts are done it's based in volume.
Of course. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, there's an incentive to increase the amount of people you're helping because you increase your revenue, which increases the amount of people that you can hire and grow your organization, buy buildings, turn them into churches, do all that stuff, right?
Right. And
Well, holy crap, that's a lot to discuss and break down. So I'm going to try to do my best. And this gets confusing because there's multiple contracts in play here. But I'm going to put this entire section under misinformation and falsehoods. And I'll be honest, it's not only a doozy, it's completely embarrassing for Sean Swope and the county. So the first thing to notice here is that Swope is discussing a completely different program now. He had originally been talking about the Recovery Navigator program and now has switched to the Coordinated Entry program. So this is actually owned by the county through the Department of Commerce, and it's something that the county oversees. And so this is a very important distinction to make in this discussion. The primary issue being that the Recovery Navigator program, mentioned previously, is in no way managed or overseen by the county, while the Coordinated Entry program absolutely is. Lewis County is the fiscal agent for that contract, meaning that they find the service provider to fulfill the requirements of the contract. Also, and this is an important piece of the whole discussion, all of the data reported on Coordinated Entry goes directly to the county, meaning that when it comes to both oversight and data reporting of said program, all of it resides and is managed by none other than Lewis County. There are 2 contracts for Coordinated Entry that Gather Church was involved in, and I'll link to those in the show notes. These are publicly available. They're on the Lewis County website, and the original contract was signed by former commissioners, Stamper, Fund, and Jackson. There's also an extension contract that was signed by Pollock, Gross, and, surprise, surprise, Sean D. Swope. So what is the significance of this? Well, if you just heard how Swope was absolutely shocked by the number of people on the Gather Coordinated Entry list, 1,800, a number he claims to have received from a Gather employee at Centralia City Council meeting. So why would he, a person who literally signed on the contract and whose own Department of Health not only oversees the contract, but is also the reporting agent for all of the data regarding that program, why would he be shocked at the numbers given? Shouldn't he be more informed on this topic than literally anybody else in the room? Furthermore, he just kind of takes this number and he runs with it. He's like a kid with scissors. A more important thing to keep in mind on this issue is that the Coordinated Entry contracts are held by Gather, were held over 2021 and 2022. And ask yourself if anything was going on during that time that would make the need for these services greater than, say, I don't know, today. So next he says that we, whoever that is, went through Gather's list and claims to have seen a lot of redundancy. The same people being listed over 5 times. And they were able to dwindle that number down to 120 people. So there's a lot to unpack here. Did he then go to his own health department and get the list? Did the 1,800 figure match the list now apparently in his possession? And when he says they saw redundancy, is he implying that he had access to HIPAA patient information? Like he could see their names? I mean, is that something that he's allowed to access? I mean, these are just questions. But thankfully, these numbers are available via request to the health department. I have the data from the 22 months that Gather managed the Coordinated Entry contracts. So what is the actual number reported by the health department? 1,439. It is also my understanding that this is the deduplicated data. So where is Swope getting this 120 number? It doesn't appear anyone actually knows. I'd be very interested in Swope showing his math here. So, if he could provide that information, that would be really enlightening. So this is a recurring problem with Swope. He has a very loose relationship with numbers. It's like McCarthy's lists of communists. The number changes between tellings, often increasing here and there. He did the same thing when he was talking about COVID relief funds, by the way. Not only did he manage to completely misunderstand what funds actually went toward, but by the time he was done using this number, it had increased to 24 million, a value just completely unsupported by the facts on hand. Now, if I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think it might be worth considering how this list works. The list from the health department, the one with 1,439 people on it, is a list of people over a 22-month period that had been engaged in coordinated entry. Like, in other words, it's the total list. It does not represent the actual active list of coordinated entry individuals. The active lists are those who are, actively being worked through the program. That number will vary from month to month as people get services, need services, or end up unavailable for services. So it's my understanding that it's not common to have, or that's not uncommon to have anywhere from 100 to 300 or more active cases for any given month. So if we want to give Swope the benefit of the doubt on this, we could probably surmise that he's confused the total list with the active list. But given his authority and responsibility, it becomes even more important for a person of his position to be knowledgeable and clear on these matters, especially if they find themselves on broadcast radio with the owner and publisher of our local newspaper. So sadly, this is even the most egregious error Swope has committed in these 9 minutes and 13 seconds. So we're going to get to that next. So Swope goes on to say, what people need to understand, this is a quote, what people need to understand is the way that the homeless services and the contracts are done is based on volume, unquote. Now, remember when I referred to having in my possession the actual contracts that stipulate the conditions of the coordinated entry program? The very one that Swope himself signed and the ones I've linked to in the show notes. Okay, so both the original contract and the amendment equal to a contracted amount of $186,664. So we'll just do Swope math, $180,000, period, total. That's for 22 months of service. Nowhere in this contract is there a stipulation or a clause that would indicate that the more people who are served by this contract, the more money the contract will pay out. This contract is not by volume. It is by value, by services provided. So let me say this as clear as I can. When Sean Swope says that these contracts are based on volume, contracts that he has signed and has the data on, contracts that are publicly available to any and all, he is completely, absolutely, and undeniably making a demonstrably false statement on facts that he should be intimately familiar with. That Sean Swope, Lewis County Commissioner, and Chad Taylor, owner and publisher of our local newspaper, would so recklessly misrepresent the facts of the matter is behavior unfitting for their respective positions and authority. And to do so on a publicly broadcasted radio program is really inexcusable. In light of these comments, I reached out to a friend who has a better understanding of legal matters than I do to explain to me how slander works. And here's their response. Quote, broadly, it has to be false, not just embarrassing, received by other people, and that the person knew it was false when they said it. If a public official is involved, there has to be actual malice. That means it has to be proven that the person meant for the statement to be harmful, not just that it resulted in being harmful. Unquote. So ask yourself this. Ask yourself if Swope's reckless use and misuse of the facts at hand meet the definition of slander as defined above. And ask yourself if Swope, in misrepresenting the contracts that he himself assigned, is putting the county at risk. Chad Taylor isn't off the hook on any of this either. He has been an integral part in platforming this very rhetoric. This is the type of rhetoric that is greatly harmful to our community and to our political discourse as a whole. It needs to be called out for what it is, propaganda, and it needs to stop. So we'll move on to the next segment. They talk a little bit about, Swope has some nice things to say about some employees that he has in the health department who do a lot of work for him. And he talks about wanting to engage people that want help and that there's a big population that doesn't want to engage. What's the process? Him and Chad, both agree that Blakesley is not a place that people should be living in. I don't think anybody thinks that Blakesley is a place people should be living in. I don't think that anybody has made that stance. What I think people are saying is that Blakesley's literally the only option in our area available to them. And yeah, anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But they discuss that, and then they kind of move into this next segment.
What's interesting is, let's say, so we've got a person now that works in our jails that help to get people well, that go through the jail system. And something that is very concerning is that when they talk to people that are addicts, that are going through, that we're helping to hopefully by the time they get out of jail that they are clean and they're ready to start on a new path forward. But they keep saying things like this, that intensive outpatient, a service that Gather has been telling these people that they offer, just to hold on. They're getting paid for this service, but they're telling them, hold on, we're still trying to get it together. They're collecting money for this, but they're keeping people in a state of addiction and not really getting them services while getting paid for services. And this conversation hasn't just been had with one or two people, but we're talking about 6+ people that have said the same thing, that have gone through the jail, that have an addiction problem, that has been at Blakesley Junction or is in a homeless situation that has gone through.
All right. Wow. So this little section lands in both the anecdata category and the misinformation falsehood category. Like I said, once again, anecdata is very difficult to respond to due to the lack of information and verification. Here's what is true. Gather Church does not offer intensive outpatient services. They would like to. They plan to. However, Swope is claiming, by way of anecdotal data, rather boldly, that Gather is telling people that they provide this service, and furthermore, that Gather is guilty of committing contractual fraud. Now, considering that there's no extensive outpatient provided, I'm not exactly sure how Gather could be paid and or bill for such a thing. The program literally has to exist before somebody can take money for it. But that's aside the point. This is an extremely serious accusation. And given Sean Swope's loose relationship with facts that he should be intimately familiar with, I'm going to ask that Swope publicly and clearly provide this evidence on this rather serious matter. Furthermore, I would state that if this is in fact true and Gather is guilty of contractual fraud, the best place for the revelation of this information would not be on a local radio show with Chad freaking Taylor. The best, most effective means to address this rather serious accusation would be providing this information to the proper authorities and contract holders so that the appropriate action can take place. And anything like less than that is negligent propaganda, and it's unfit for the responsibility and the authority that these two men hold. In short, our community deserves better than this. So we get into this whole wrap up, and we'll listen to this segment, and then I will finish up here.
Yeah, and I assume that you're making statements that Gather Church is basically taking money that they shouldn't be because they're not performing the service. I would assume that you have proof to back up something like that if someone were to ask.
Well, and that's what we're trying to get to the bottom. And I think that they're, just in all of our contracts right now, for instance, the Recovery Navigator.
Yes. I
think that's a $500,000 program that Gather Church is getting. The $500,000 is the number that I was given. But we need to figure out, because they're going to re-up that contract in June and it's not working. So why would we do that?
All right. So this is probably one of the more telling aspects of this entire conversation. You can see Chad Taylor summarizing the issue that they believe Gather Church is basically taking money that they shouldn't be. They never use the word fraud, but if what they're saying is true, there is no better name for it. And how does Sean Swope respond to Taylor's assumption that for Swope to be saying all of this, he must have solid proof to back it up? Swope responds with, quote, "Yes, well, that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of," unquote. It's like if I was Chad Taylor, who had just hosted 9 minutes and 13 seconds of some of the most serious accusations of mismanagement, misrepresentation, and contractual fraud, I'd be more than a little nervous if my guest, when responding to if they had solid proof to back up this claim, said, yes, well, that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. These two individuals hold an enormous amount of power in our area. And with that comes, I believe, an even greater responsibility to comport themselves with integrity, honesty, and transparency. Both men claim that accountability is extremely important to them, but given the seriousness of the accusations and the claim made in this short period of time, hosted publicly on a local radio station, I'm going to ask both men to please bring forward the evidence that supports their claims. Given that it's been over a month since these revelations were aired, and Swope's inability to understand even the data and functions of the contracts under his own control, I'm going to be highly skeptical that this evidence will be proffered anytime soon, if at all. My request here is only one simple thing: put up or shut up. This also reveals Swope's consistent mishandling of numbers. So in this interview, which took place a month ago, he claims that the contract amount of Recovery Navigator program is $500,000. Last week, however, in statements he's made in public meetings, this number has varied from $500,000 to $600,000 to $650,000. Now, these contracts for Recovery Navigator program are also publicly available. I would like to remind my listeners, though, that Lewis County is not an authority on these contracts. Lewis County is not a party involved in these contracts. The reason why I bring this up is because I've spent a lot of time showing at great length how Swope doesn't even understand the basic functions of contracts under his supervision. How much more can we expect him to understand contracts not even managed under his purview? He has also loudly proclaimed in public meetings last week that the Recovery Navigator program receives $650,000 for a staff of 2, glibly adding, quote, "How can I get on that list?" Well, thankfully, Patty Howard, a pastor of Gather Church, was able to attend that meeting, hear his claim, and return later to another public meeting to correct it. She stated, quote, "We currently have a staff of 6, 3 of whom are outreach focused and 3 of whom are case management focused. Their expertise ranges from peers with lived experience to a licensed independent clinical social worker," unquote. So what does all this reveal? It shows that Swope has no qualms about loudly bloviating on subjects that he's completely ignorant on. And he continually does so. He's even gone so far as to add a line item on public agenda so he can continue his campaign of misrepresenting both information he should be more knowledgeable about and information he has little grasp of. Swope ends the program by stating, "We need to figure out because they are going to re-up that contract in June, and it's not working, so why would we do that?" So this is something of a big reveal with Swope that I've seen repeatedly in his dealings on multiple issues. The primary point here is that there is no we here. Swope is not a part of this contract. He has no say in this contract. He's intentionally inserting himself into and interfering with this contract between parties of which he is not a part. Our local area is in a world of hurt right now. We seem to be experiencing in real time, no less, a sort of unraveling. There's been a cadence of bad news, bad outcomes, and bad behavior. Many people in our area cannot afford housing. Housing that had been available to them, even if not ideal, has been reduced, displacing even more families into the margin. Fires attributed to those with substance use disorder, mental health issues, homelessness, or just plain criminal intent have destroyed empty buildings, encampments, motels, and more. We've recently learned that a family will find no justice regarding the killing of their son and his puppy on our very soil. Even with an admission of culpability, a gun, and the matching bullet retrieved from the victim, there will be no day in court, no jury appears, no due process, and no justice. Through a myriad of procedural failures, systemic dysfunction, a history of internecine political squabbles, and despot fiefdoms, we now get to reap what someone else has sown. And as often as not, with people in power, they remain unscathed while navigating the casualties of their failures. We have a father dying of cancer, grieving the killing of his son, who hadn't heard anything about his son's case, neither good, bad, nor otherwise, for 10 months. He worries that his own loss will be forgotten in all of the other terrible events, and he's short on time. There's a lot of anger out there, a lot of genuine injustice. There is resentment and division. The divide feels unsurmountable. Given all of these ongoing issues and the growing antagonism of our population, I believe it's important now, more than ever, that our leadership, those entrusted with carrying the burden of governance, be open, humble, and most importantly, honest in how they conduct themselves. Not only in how they represent their views and decisions, but in how they talk about those with whom they disagree. If accountability is such a big deal with Chad Taylor and Sean Swope, the best place to start might be in their own houses, so to speak. Both could make a better effort to understand the basics of the topics they are discussing. They could exercise discretion when making wild accusations publicly. So I titled this episode, Sean Swope Needs Our Help. And the truth is, all of our leaders need our help. And there's various positions that people hold that will give them different opportunities to help our leaders. So for Sean Swope, I would ask his peers, those other elected officials, either in the county or in municipalities in the county, to make sure that he's not falling into these category traps of giving misinformation or jumping to anecdotal data as though it's the truth, or surviving on technicalities. Okay, I would call on his employees that report directly or indirectly to him to make sure he has the right information and that he understands the information that he has, that he knows what he's working with, that he's expressing the correct ideas of how these things function. I would also reach out to his constituents. Make your voice known. Help him to understand these things better. I know that Sean Swope is a Christian, so I would appeal to his church, to his pastor, to his spiritual mentors, to his congregants, to other people in his life, in the life of faith, to make sure that he's walking in paths of righteousness, that he is above reproach, that he carries himself with integrity and dignity and humility. That is the calling of all Christians. In the end, I think we can do better. And I'm calling on our leaders. I'm calling on our community members. I'm calling on anybody that has a vested interest in this to do better, to work harder to reach across the aisles, to restore some sense of normalcy and dignity to the way that we talk about these things, or just to plain be honest and open and transparent as we can. Anyways, I apologize for the length of this. It went longer than I thought it would. There's a lot more I could say, but I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm sad. I'm angry. I'm many things. But I'm also hopeful. I think things can be different. And I hope you will join me in working toward someday things being different. Anyways, this is Mitch Guthrie from the Long Letter Podcast. Thank you for listening.